chapter 4. I don't know if this is something that begins to happen to people as they get older, but you become increasingly aware of the fact that your time on this earth is limited with each second. I think I've said in the past that being a person that's enjoyed planning certain things around my house, I have rather quit doing it because of just the nature of how long it takes something to grow, that I don't even have confidence that it would even reach maturity, and I'm not too much interested in planting it for someone else. That may be selfish or whatever, but the fact that we're going to come to an end, and we're either going to die or God's going to rapture the church and go to heaven. And I'm going to spend a lot of time this evening trying to connect those two thoughts. Let's just read the rapture section. We'll begin, if you would, at verse 13, and then we will discuss the entire chapter tonight. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 13, "But I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning them which are asleep, that ye sorrow not, even as others which have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so them also which sleep in Jesus will God bring with him. For this we say unto you by the word of the Lord, that we which are alive and remain unto the coming of the Lord shall not prevent them which are asleep. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, and with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. Wherefore comfort one another with these words." Reminds me when I was in the first or second grade, or whenever they started letting you read, and you would try to count down to where you would read, and I always did that. If I'd count how many people were reading, and I'd count down real fast and try to read my sentence. And I don't know how many times I'm going to pronounce archangel. It's just one of those things that I do. I apologize for that, but the air is done, and it's recorded in more places than one. Hope tonight that you will still your hearts and concentrate on this rather difficult sermon. I don't mind telling you, it's going to close with a blessing, but it's going to be difficult before it gets to the blessing. And I'm going to try to make it relevant to us, God willing. And you know, folks, I have spent my ministry, for the most part, considering the New Testament. I just start at Matthew and go through Revelation, and when I get finished, I start over again. I don't necessarily go book by book like that, but I will promise you that I do not go back to another New Testament book until I finish all of the New Testament books. Then I will start over again. So, I may not have them in absolute sequence. And therefore, I have oftentimes in the past would take a 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and make a minimum of 2 sermons out of it. And I would look at the first portion of it under the theme that I give my first point here: Christian sanctification prepares one for the rapture. And you will see that in verses 1 through 12. And then the second portion of that sermon would be the rapture proper. So I would have Christian sanctification prepares you for the rapture, and then I would look at the rapture. That would be the second way I do it. So tonight we're going to get 2 sermons for one, which means that you get it all just for the same price. It's just one flat price, and you get 2 sermons, which I think is a pretty good deal. I emailed someone today, and I was talking about sending my sermons out, and I asked them if they actually thought $1,000 per sermon was really too much. And that came back with a nice little exchange. My theme tonight is the dogmatic look at the rapture And my sub-theme is the imminency of the rapture. When I first got saved, it was the facts was that I was blessed with a good man that was rather intelligent. He had been well trained at Bob Jones University. He had been instructed by Bob Jones Sr. in preaching style. And he just really, he stayed in the trenches on the things that were so important. And I was blessed to learn about the rapture of the church. I don't mind telling you, I don't think I had ever heard the expression prior to becoming a Christian. I don't think that I ever had. I had a lot of basic Bible knowledge, but I had no knowledge until I got saved that Jesus could come back at any moment. And I don't mind telling you that was something that was very important to me early on in my Christian experience. It changed a lot of my behaviorism. But folks, I don't mind telling you, on a small scale, like so many people, it did not take long for me to allow certain things to creep back into my life, of which I don't mind telling you that if I had been doing some of these things at the very instant that Jesus came back to rapture His church, I would stand before Him very ashamed. I am becoming very conscientious of that now as me. I hope tonight when you leave this church, you will become more conscientious of it. And I hope that you will use this to help other people and teach other people that every second of our life ought to be safeguarded by the Spirit of God and by God's grace to not be caught unawares. There is going to be a generation of people caught unawares that are God's children. And they're going to go and stand before God ashamed. I just really believe that. I don't have a lot of confidence in Christians today, and don't have a lot of confidence there are very many Christians. I was talking to someone just recently about how this past Sunday, at our little church, for the most part, we were all back here Sunday night. But I was talking to someone said Sunday morning was just an enormous big church service, and Sunday night it was just a church full of pews. And why? Why? Because the next day was New Year's? I mean, where were you going someplace to watch fireworks go off? Was that more important than going to church? And just think about it just for a moment. And well, for 1950 plus years, the church has believed that the Apostle Paul taught the Thessalonians about the imminency of the rapture. It's just a basic little word, the imminent return of the Lord Jesus Christ. It means it could happen at any given moment. Do you believe He's going to come back tonight? Just think about it. Do you or don't you? Now, there's two things about that. I want you to just think about in God's clock what it means that for 1950 plus years, this has been a theme that the church has dealt with. God's clock, by way of illustration, has not ticked off 2 days yet, because a day with the Lord's 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day. Now, if God, under the Spirit of God, when He was given that, He could have said a day with the Lord's 1,000,000 years, but it wouldn't have no meaning to us. He put 1,000 years because it has more of a meaning. God, there is no time with God. But on that, using that, not even 2 full days has ticked off since Paul, under the inspiration of the Spirit of God, wrote this chapter. Now, with that in mind, there are 2 potential negatives that we have to be aware of, and one part of this negative is something that's relevant for us, and the other part is just the way the world is, and we learn by the way the world is. The first part is that faithlessness in the saints is a product of not believing that Jesus can come back at any given moment. I know that most of God's children find themselves far too many times doing things they would not be doing if they believed in their heart Jesus could come back right now. I mean, where you are, how you're talking, who you're with, what you're thinking about at 10 o'clock at night, what you plan. I mean, just lying in bed and making your plans for what you're going to be doing tomorrow, and doing some like premeditation of things that you know, lying there in bed, and your brain is working, and you know if Jesus has come back, He's reading your brain, you don't get a chance to deal with that. There's 1,000 things. So faithlessness in the saints is something that I believe that you need to consider. He says in verse 13, "But I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning them which are asleep, that ye sorrow not, even as others have no hope." He certainly brings out the fact that these Thessalonians were capable of being ignorant. So this first point deals with professing Christians that probably are Christians. The second potential negative deals with unbelievers that we see in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 3 and 4, talking about the people that will be scoffing. And you're aware, since the fathers fell asleep, everything's continued and who's going to be scoffing? The unbelievers are going to be scoffing about that. So here's what you have in the world today. You have unfaithful Christians that are not ready for Jesus to come back. Boy, how I would love to ask you, are you ready for Him to come back tonight? And every one of you, as the Spirit of God would move upon your heart, and you'd be honest and hold up your hand. And boy, I'd be able to say, everybody in my church held up their hand. But see, I would not embarrass you or make you lie to yourself or lie to God. It would not be something wise for a preacher to do. But folks, we live in a world of scoffers that are unbelievers, and they mock at the fact that God could come back and start the end time at any given moment. Folks, both symptoms are part of God's greater plan that we read about in Romans chapter 11, verse 33. "I have found in this life that we go from one test to another, and many of those tests, if not most of them, are authorized by God Himself." God allows almost every test you go through. Many of y'all have gone through tests this century, since starting the year 2000. You go from one test to another. And at any time, as you were going through that test, Jesus could have come back and could have caught you in whatever shape you were in that test. Now, don't get mad at me, but some of y'all didn't do well with some of those tests. Some of you erred greatly. You've had an opportunity since then to go to God and to ask for forgiveness and to alter your way and change your lifestyle and get back on course. But you know, you could have been caught. Now, if He comes back in our lifetime, these tests could come on us again. And if you fail a test in the future the way maybe you have failed one in the past, it may be that's the time Jesus comes back. And maybe you got this philosophy, "Pastor, I don't care. I just want to go to heaven. I don't care what kind of shape He catches me in." Well, I promise you, you're not going to feel that way if He does come back and catch you doing something. Hey, by the way, that train coming by that's now blowing like that, my friend in Australia said that he heard the same thing Sunday. He really responds to hearing my sermons, and Brother Keith, and he said, "Pastor Uten said, I hope Casey Jones didn't scare the fish to death," as he went by the. So he gets a kick out of that, and God bless the little engineer. If he enjoys blowing up, you know what he did was not even something you're supposed to be doing. First of all, he's got a W sign up here where he's supposed to do that, and you don't supposed to hold a horn down for 1.5 miles like that, but he did it, and that's the way that is. So what can you do about it? See what a good mood I'm in? And y'all probably going to need me to be in a good mood here before the evening's over. Failing test, in my personal opinion, I hope I'm correct on this, emphasizes that you're not prepared for the rapture. If you can't pass the test, then if the rapture were to come, then you're not ready for the rapture. And I'm telling you right now, folks, you're not going to want to be caught in sin when Jesus comes back. You're going to be wanting to be prayed up, and ready to meet Him. Now, I just guarantee you that's the way it's going to be. Now, I know that we do things that's stupid because we really don't believe He's going to come back right now. And there's 50,000 different sins that we can do and get caught up in. And most of them have nothing to do with adultery or idolatry or fornication or stealing. That's just, Christians for the most part aren't even involved in sins like that. But we got thousands of other sins that it would be very sad if Jesus came back and called us. So, surely you will be able to see this evening, the first portion of this text still warns against sexual sins of men and women claiming to believe in the imminent rapture of the church. The imminent rapture of the church. Point 1, verses 1 through 12, Christian sanctification prepares one for the rapture. Sanctification regarding 3 subjects is in verse 3 through 6. Immorality, marriage, and adultery. Immorality or concupiscence comes from the Greek word epithumia. Epithumia. It means a desire, a craving, a longing, desire for what is forbidden, lust. I wonder if that goes to the back of anybody's mind in here and shakes you a little bit. I'm thinking that Adam's depravity seemingly has increased with each generation. I was looking on the internet today, and I was looking at the face of a young entertainer that, I don't mind telling you, 3 or 4 years ago, I thought maybe was one of the most beautiful people that I had ever laid eyes on this earth. And she's now 24 years old. And I don't mind telling you, I don't know if it was just bad camera work, if the photography was just caught her off guard or what. But this young woman looked more like 35 than 24. And you can only hang around and drinking and getting drunk and falling on your face. And I guess the cat's out of the bag who I'm talking about, huh? But you can only do stuff like that. Live that kind of life so long. And it catches up with you. Sin has a way of catching up with you. It's a shame when the only thing that you have is your looks. I mean, you couldn't pass a college test if your life depended on it. If it came to working for a living or having to use your head to do something, you would just be on welfare. Yeah, the only thing that you got is your looks, and you rob yourself of that through stupidity. I believe that immorality has totally encompassed the human race. And I'm absolutely sure that pagan religion actively advocates fornication. Go back to chapter 1, verse 9 and see that if you like. I'm going to try to say what I'm going to say now as delicately as I can, but I was watching a commercial last night of modern day religious music, and there was hundreds, if not thousands, of young people sitting there listening to these people perform. I'm going to go before God and stand before God for what I'm going to say to you right now, but if these young people weren't demon-possessed, then I'm blind. There's a look on your face when you don't have control no more. Nothing about these songs had anything to do with God. Nothing about the music was written in a key that I was taught at Bob Jones University is a key that God would honor and recognize. You cannot put Jesus and His name and anything to do with Him in a rock song and it have anything to do with God and worship. I'm going to go to my grave believing that. I'm going to go to my grave believing that when you do that, you're demon-possessed. And I also believe people that go along with that are demon-possessed people because you could just look at these folks. These folks were not worshiping God. They were caught up in some kind of a pagan festival. Only God knows what happened when it was over that night. Only God knows what happened when they went outside of that place. It's just pitiful to look at. Now, I'm going to tell you something now that may be alarming to you. But I believe any true professing Christian is subject to backslide. And I believe any true professing Christian, a true Christian, is capable of backsliding into unbelievable depths of degradation. I believe the Bible's perfectly clear on that. You give an inch, you'll take a mile. You go one step backwards, you may fall all the way back from where you started. It's frightening. Verse 4 in our text, that every one of you should know how to possess his vessel in sanctification and honor. I cannot pronounce the Greek word for vessel. I'm going to spell it to you. It's spelled S-K-E-U-O-S. I was looking at that epsilon, upsilon, those two vowels in the Greek language, and it's not, you don't pronounce it epsilon E or upsilon U. You somehow, they're showing you when you pronounce that, it's like saying Edward without the D in it. You have to get an E and a W sound. And I can hardly articulate was or go. So I cannot articulate that word. But it is a word that is used metaphorically in 1 Peter chapter 3 verse 7, referring to a man's wife, a woman being the weaker vessel. Now, whether that's the same word being used, it's the very same Greek word, and whether that's the same way it's being used here or not, look at it in that sense, that every one of you should know how to possess his wife in sanctification and honor. If that's what that means, and some theologians believe it is, so be it. I don't know. I don't even really have an opinion on it. The theologians say a married man will abstain from fornication because he respects his wife. And boy, if there's ever been a time where you think a married man would do that, you'd think a married man would today, because you don't know if you go out and fornicate, what's going to come back home with you. See what I'm saying? Now, I mean, if people did a little bit of reading what's going on in the world today, they wouldn't fornicate no more. That'd be the last thing on earth you would do, be fornicate. Because your odds of getting back home the way you left home are slim and none. And on the way out, Neil will tell you where none is. Slim too. They both left town, so that's the way that is. But folks, a married man will highly regard his own body when he's a Christian, because his body, according to God's Word in the New Testament, is the temple of God. 1 Corinthians chapter 3 verse 16. 1 Corinthians chapter 3 verse 17. 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 19. 2 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 16. It's important for you to mark and read those words. What is your body? It is a temple. It is a temple for who? It is the temple for the Spirit of God. Now, who would take God's temple and conjunct it with an illegitimate relationship? Who would do that? Certainly no Christian in fellowship would do that. You have to be backslidden to do that. I'm sorry, brothers and sisters, I'm just on the verse, what the verse is teaching. What does a Christian man do? He learns how to possess his vessel. He learns how to do that. He takes care of himself. As a matter of fact, that's probably what the word means. The Greek word here is difficult to translate and therefore highly interpretive. But suffice it to say, marriage must be properly valued. Marriage must be virtuous and pure. And shame on a man or a woman that gets into a marriage that they do not keep that. It's a must that you do it. I'm going to tell you something. I'm even going down on a limb a little bit further. I don't think that a man has a right to go out and carouse around in the evening time and come home to his little wife that's sitting in the home babysitting with the children. You know, folks, you go carousing around the bars. Only God knows in heaven what you're prone to bring back home. Not only to your wife, but to your children. I was reading the other day the 10 worst places that you can put your hands. And one of them is a restroom. Now, what man goes to a bar that doesn't spend half his time at the bar in the restroom? So now, Pastor, I used to go to the restroom and I always washed up. Sure you did. Yeah, you sponged down with alcohol, didn't you? No, you were like everybody else. Just being out in the world and bringing that home to your little wife and to your children. Say, well, I don't think any Christians are doing that. Well, God bless your heart. You've maintained your status as an ostrich, haven't you? You know, ostriches always have their head buried in the sand. They don't see or hear anything. Now, I'm afraid this does happen to a lot of professing Christians. A third thing is adultery. I was, in times past, allowing a lot of people access to my sermons. I had a person email me one time and tell me, boy, I highly resent your attitude about adultery. Well, listen, I never thought I even had an attitude about it. I thought I was just sort of like a mockingbird or a parrot or something other, just sort of like repeating what Jesus said. I didn't think I ever added too much to it. God's got His own view on this. I believe adultery generally, if not almost always, affects the other person in the marriage. I do not believe early on that both people in a marriage are committing adultery. I think one of them's doing it and the other one's not. I don't believe a man and woman gets married and after about 90 days they just say, well, okay, you go this way, honey, I'll go that way, and we'll meet back here in about 2 hours, okay? So I just don't think it works out like that. Now, I'm not always saying it's the men. I get a little sick of women that always saying, well, what's wrong with the men? Well, let me tell you something, ladies. That man that's out there doing something wrong is not out there doing something wrong by himself. There's a woman out there. See what I'm saying? So there's no innocence in that sense. And there's as many bad women as there are bad men. It's about 50-50. About 1 for 1. Adultery may affect an innocent person in another marriage. You ever think about that? You're out and you pick up someone at the bar, some nice lady, nice looking lady, and you go off someplace and commit adultery, and guess what? That lady that you picked up may be married to a good man that's home, that doesn't even know what his wife's doing. He thinks that she's out with the ladies group someplace doing some painting pictures or weaving cloth together or something other. Where you been, honey? Oh, me and the ladies, we were out. We were making quilts. Well, in the back of my mind's wanting to say something or use that verb a little different. Y'all can go ahead and do that. We're all grown up here, all except Adam. He's almost grown up. Getting close. College boy here. Second semester sophomore. Boy, who would have ever believed that? Goodness gracious. Second semester. Adultery will also hurt other members of the family. Hurts in-laws. Because sooner or later, adultery will destroy a family. And it will destroy Mama and Papa on both sides. It will destroy aunts and uncles on both sides. And it's the same thing. I repeat this one time. Someone said, I just don't believe all that in adultery. And I said, well, what are you? Or I emailed the person back. I said, are you stupid? Don't you know what it means when a grandparent can't see their grandchildren anymore because a divorce has come up and you don't have access to your grandchildren? Why? Because of adultery. That's why. Adultery. You get married, you're supposed to stay with the person you're married with. That's what you're supposed to do. That's what this text is talking about. Oftentimes the innocent parties are never privy to adulterous acts. You'd be surprised how many people have done it for years, gone out for years committing adultery, and the husband or the wife never caught on, never knew anything was going on. Because you know, innocent people are usually real stupid about worldly things. Real stupid. I mean, innocent people are so trustworthy. They just tolerate. Oh, is that what you were doing? Car broke down 2 days ago? But you know, folks, God's always privy. And I'm going to tell you right now, one of the scariest verses that you will ever read in God's words in verse 6, that no man go beyond and defraud his brother in any matter, because that the Lord is the avenger of all such, as we also have forewarned you and testified. That's the Greek word, ekdikos, avenger, and it means he punishes. He punishes all such wickedness. And you might want to go and give a little bit of thought about what he's talking about there. So sanctification regarding one's daily living in verse 11 and 12. A lot more sins than sexual sins. We got fanatics that come to church. Busybodies that come to church. And loafers that come to church. I was thinking today about how this new Congress is going to come in and how they're going to be trying to change things around and who's going to be cut. And I'm hearing one person say about the only way we're going to be able to survive in this country is to cut back on Social Security. And I want to say, I thought that was the one thing people that worked and earned was their Social Security. You're going to cut back on that, but you're not going to cut back on this other stuff, are you? And yeah, I'm thinking this, okay, you've been on welfare for 2 years. I believe that the government ought to move you out to where you can pick lettuce for a living and send the Mexicans back home, and people on welfare start to... I know people that have been on welfare for 3 generations now. It's time for our government to say enough's enough. I'm a little sick of... I want to draw my Social Security. Folks, I'm 65 years old. That's all I've got. I'm drawing my Social... I've been paying on... You know when I started paying Social Security? When I was 13 years old. I had to get a Social Security card and hold out Social Security when I worked at a duck pen bowling alley. I doubt very seriously they sent my Social Security in, but they sure held it out of my little 7 cents a game they paid me. I doubt the government has record of that. Even though God bless Paddle Smith, I hope he's in heaven, Brother Jake, but he was the man I worked for. Well, fanatics and busybodies and loafers. The instructions are very clear. Live a calm life. Engage your efforts in your own affairs. And work with your own hands. Everybody in this church right now works. I'm so glad about that. I believe Brother Leonard McCoy gave me one of the greatest lines on that one time about working that I think I have ever heard in my life. That I can't repeat, but it was just a grand line about working. When did you start working, Leonard? About 14. Yeah, that's about when everybody starts killing termites, don't they, Brother Russell? How old was you when you started doing it? See what I'm saying? That's right. Nobody I know started earlier, Desi, was Chris. He started about 6, didn't he? You know what I'm saying? Work with your own hands. If you don't work, you don't eat. Is that God's Word? Is that what God says in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10? If you don't work, you don't eat. Cursed be a nation that keeps feeding lazy people. I know people have never worked. I live right in the middle of them. How in the name of God can you own a home and 2 new cars and you've never worked? You don't work. How do you do that? Well, that's the little stuff here everybody comes by and gets every once in a while. Is the way I manage. Folks, there's no use us going to the next point if you don't take care of these first 12 verses. This next point ain't going to have no meaning to nobody that does not take care of the first 12 verses. No exceptions to the rule. May I say something, Russell? I woke up Sunday and I was afraid to die. And that scared me. What'd you say, Pastor? I woke up from my nap Sunday and I was afraid to die. And that scared me. I ought not be afraid to die. Death is the key that unlocks the lock that opens up heaven. Death is our friend. God loves to bring His children home. The Bible's got multiple verses that teach that. Russell, I could die tonight a lot easier than I could have Sunday. God's been very good to me this week. I've prayed repeatedly, Father, forgive me and help me by your grace to do better. Sin no more. Do you know how many times I've said that since Sunday? Sin no more. Paul clears all misunderstandings in verse 13. From apostolic times, the rapture has been told. Make no mistake. This has nothing to do with Revelation chapter 19. The text is too clear, the 2 different texts. The early church was just learning about the rapture without having a personal Bible. Me and you have a personal Bible. We can read what God says in His Word right here. You know what Jesus is going to do in Revelation chapter 19? He's going to come down here to Jerusalem and set up His kingdom. In this text, He's going to come to the clouds and call His children up and take them back to heaven. In Revelation chapter 19, He's going to bring His children with Him. The early church was just learning about the rapture. And the Thessalonians were wrongly taught, I believe, by some false teachers. They had lost the true interpretation. Why was the rapture so difficult to understand? Because me and you do not understand the prevailing thoughts about death in the first century. Death just seemed like an end. Seems like an end to people today. People die today and people are scared to death. Folks, some of y'all were with your pastor many, many years ago when we carried a corpse up on the side of a mountain. And a woman that was married to that corpse would not leave without opening that casket. And literally was dragging that body out of that casket. Y'all were with me. I was the pastor of this church. It broke my heart. She wasn't even aware of the fact that this was death. This was dead dirt, dead clay. Unsaved people have no hope. And it was probably the prevailing thought of people 20 centuries ago. The dilemma here is not clear, but a serious dilemma prevailing regarding the people that had already died. We don't even know what the problem really was. Paul tells them that the departed loved ones are okay in verse 14. I say there goes a good engineer. God bless his heart. I hope he gets a raise. Hope he gets promoted to road foreman of engines. Pray for that. Pray for the good people that go by here and do the right thing. This verse teaches 2 important truths. That the soul spirit will come back with Jesus. Look what it says in verse 14. Read it with your own eyes. Let your own eyes read it. For we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so them also which sleep in Jesus will God bring with Him. Sleep in Jesus, what does that mean, Pastor? It means that they're with Jesus because He's going to bring them back with Him. Where is your loved ones that are gone on? They're in heaven. What's Jesus going to do at the rapture? He's going to bring them back. Why? Because it's just their soul spirit. And their bodies are going to be brought out of the ground, brought up to the clouds, and joined back in with that soul spirit. I've always been taught that, and I've always believed that. Of course, it's understood the new body and the new soul will be reunited in the clouds. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? I can't see why anybody wouldn't be a Christian. Surely this is ample proof that a lost man is dead and incapable of any spiritual reasoning, because why would a person remain lost that can believe this? Why? Why would you take a chance? Where are you going, honey? Going down to the bank. Well, see you in about an hour. If I don't pull out in front of somebody that puts me in eternity before I get back. Where had the pastor been? He'd been at church. Where was he going? He was going home. And what happened? He was going around a curve and someone hit him head on 80 miles an hour. You can die before you get home tonight, friends. Why would a person put off being saved if a person had a say-so about it? Verse 15 speaks of equality between the dead and the living. Notice that this equality is based on God's Word. Death is not the end. Why do we fear it so much? You know why I fear it, Brother Russell? Because I got sin in my heart from time to time. That's why I fear death. You cannot have sin in your heart and not fear death. The living will not prevent those who are asleep in Jesus from following to heaven. As a matter of fact, the dead will lead the way. The rapture defined, verse 16 and 17. Some people say the clouds do not mean the clouds in the sense of clouds proper. I believe that it does mean that. I believe Jesus will stop at the level of the clouds and call His children up to Him. That's just a grand thing. That's what I'm counting on happening. That's what I believe this text teaches. Come back to the clouds. I believe the glorified Christ could not possibly come on back to earth at this time. I just don't believe He could do it. This earth is not fit for Jesus to come back to right now. He's going to have to do some things to this earth before He can come back here. I don't know exactly how much cleansing is going to take place on the earth during the tribulation period, but there's going to be a lot of cleansing. One thing is going to cleanse almost all the wicked sinners off from it. They're going to be dead in hell. That's going to be a lot of cleansing right there. Folks, the Jesus that was on this earth 2,000 years ago could not be on this earth now because He has His glory back now. He had to lay that aside to come down here. He cannot lay that aside again. He cannot be the same Jesus that comes back that was here 2,000 years ago. This world could not stand God the Son to come here right now. No way. The world has to be cleansed before He can come back. So therefore, I believe the rapture of the church is another gift that God has given to us by His marvelous grace as a tool. What kind of tool? It's a tool that cleans me and you up. If you were to think about the rapture every day of your life, it would clean you up. You wouldn't be talking trash. You wouldn't be listening to trash. You wouldn't be running around with trash. You wouldn't be thinking trash. You wouldn't be watching trash on television. You wouldn't be listening to trash on the radio. These would be sanctified. These would be sanctified. I'll tell you, when you hear a preacher say that the Weather Channel offends him, You're listening to a man that's sanctified by God's marvelous grace. You know, they carry on the Weather Channel a little bit too much. They get a little too personal on there every once in a while. Folks, we have lost our sanctification. I don't know what's going on in my studying anymore, but chapter after chapter is touching my heart in ways that my heart's not been touched before. I want you folks ready when Jesus comes. Paul reminds us, therefore, to comfort one another. That's the last thing he says to us in verse 18. I have never felt that death was a final thing for a Christian friend. I have had Christian friends die. Some of them I've held their hand right to the last moment. I've always known it was just a brief separation and not an end. Like everybody else that loses a loved one, at first it brings a lot of sorrow, but eventually it brings a lot of satisfaction. Try and think about who's the dearest person to me that's in heaven right now. I have so many. I couldn't set one dear one. Boy, when they died, I thought I was going to die. I believe that I suffered the hardest when Otis died. Even more than my mom or my dad. When my brother Otis Francis died, I came home. It was about 4 or 5 in the morning when I got home, and I laid down in the bed and I hugged my wife up. And I sobbed until I couldn't catch my breath. I thought I was going to lose my breath and die sobbing. Now, you know what I do now about Otis? Every once in a while I say, Otis, if you can hear me, go talk to the Lord and tell Him I'm sorry the way I'm behaving. Say, Pastor, that's stupid. I know it's stupid. I'm a pretty stupid person, but I do it nonetheless. He was the one person that I thought at death I would be able to say, but if you see something right there at the end, just before you're going, will you tell me about it? I hadn't made up my mind I was going to do that, but right there at the close, I wouldn't do that. Newt got so emotional up here a while ago that I can't hardly touch on his wife, but it broke my heart when she left too, pal. People that serve God right here. A lot of folks have gone on from this ministry. Would you like to have them back, Pastor? No. Come back from heaven to this world? Not a chance. I just wish I had the courage to close my eyes and say, I've done my best. I'm ready to come home, Lord. But I can't say that right now. That's what I want sermons like this to prepare me for. And I want it to prepare you for it. Ready to leave this world. Sean, I know that's the furthest thing from your mind. What are you, 35? What is your age? How old are you? You look 27, son. It's the furthest thing from your mind, isn't it? I've never seen a Christian die hard. I've seen them suffer. I've seen them suffer a long time. But boy, I'm telling you, when death opens up to them, you always get the idea, I'm not going down to the mortuary. Last thing God's children think of is the embalming room. They think of heaven and the presence of their God. God, please help me to start getting like that. I don't want nothing to do with this world anymore. I hope this study has not been offensive. And I hope it will help some of you to become a better Christian. I know it's hard. Mean things. I've said mean things tonight. I know that. But I want us to get better by God's marvelous grace. I want to walk worthy of my calling. God's called me to be a prince. I want to be a prince.